Hello and welcome to Identirati Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue, and today is episode 43, Intersection of IAM with Cloud. Our guest today is Alex Sierra, co-founder and CTO of Tenchi Security. Welcome, Alex.
Well, hi, Mike. Thanks for having me.
And Mark Borstein, CTO of Tremolo Security, and author or co-author of two books, including a newly upcoming book in the next couple of days. Welcome, Mark.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And today we're going to have, I think, an interesting conversation about cloud security. But before we start into the technical part, Alex, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's the business driver for this conversation about cloud security?
So, cloud has seen tremendous adoption, and it's dominating the way that new applications are built, the way that new IT infrastructure is being deployed, and even existing infrastructure is being migrated into cloud at a breakneck pace. But it does introduce a lot of differences to on-prem environments. For example, people tend to say that identity is the new attack surface because it is. Because the cloud APIs, which is how you use everything, it's no longer like your VMware management control plane was behind your firewall on the on-prem world. Right now, the AWS APIs, the GCP APIs are fully exposed. And that makes a lot of things easier, but it also means that identity cannot be like the second or third or fourth consideration. It's the first one. The other thing that it does make simpler is interacting with other organizations. Since the API is already available to the outside world, it's very easy or much easier to provide access to a contractor, to a managed services provider, to a SaaS platform that needs to have access to your cloud environment. It's super simple. It's a simple configuration. You don't have to ask for site-to-site VPNs, client-to-site VPNs before you even grant people access to things. So you remove the step. And when something's easier, people do more of it, right? And herein lies the benefit and also the risk, because now you have to do it right and manage and control the risks appropriately. And that, I think, was the inspiration for the research that's listed on your homework link, Mark, which is we looked at how to do that, how to provide other AWS accounts, probably outside of your own organization, access to your AWS accounts, which is called an AWS cross-account access, right? Which is one of the ways, it's not the only one. AWS has introduced a lot of different ways to give access to people. Since that research was published, I think in 2020.
Some of them more secure than others, right?
Some of them more secure than others. And so the wealth of access being provided insecurely to people that we saw on our consulting practice and on the tests we're performing on third parties of large financial institutions, large insurance companies here at Tenchi, which is what we do, was just, I started seeing some patterns and I felt, hey, this is just explaining the basics of how to do it properly, but let's talk about it. Because the thing is, I'm going to stop after this thought because I've spoken enough, is those service providers are a force multiplier for attackers. If you look at the other link we provided for the Snowflake incident, allegedly what happened is a very large managed services provider, or BPO, like business process outsourcing provider, that did services for a lot of large corporations on helping them operate and maintain and develop analytics logic on Snowflake on their behalf. So they had access to their Snowflake tenants as admins more often than not. If you're a hacker and you hack into this company, now you have indirectly, you've gained access to data from potentially tens or hundreds of companies at once, instead of having to hack each one individually. So we saw in the Snowflake case, Santander Bank, Ticketmaster, and so many other large companies. If you had to hack each one, how much more effort would you have had to spend as an attacker, instead of just hacking this one company that had access to all of them already? Right? So this force multiplier for attackers is the thing that we need to be cognizant of. And the importance of thinking about the risk that third parties represent to your business and the access you give them. Like what does this represent to your business?
Mark, so do you see this also where companies maybe have sort of an amnesia about like what they control and what they don't control, and maybe sometimes spend not enough time thinking about something like a third party access where they just don't see it as much, so maybe they don't worry about it.
Yeah, if ignorance is bliss, there are a lot of really happy people in C-suites. Um, you know, I kind of come from this from an interesting perspective because I've sat on both sides of this conversation. Um, I will talk to people and companies about how they are so much better off trying to or integrating a third party in and letting the identity come with them versus trying to create an identity every single time and treating contractors as if they're employee lights, like somehow they're less likely to be a problem. Um, but also, as a vendor myself, having to fill out these control spreadsheets, and then when they ask questions about things that I need to do as a vendor, being like, is this really important? Like, why is this important? And just getting these blank scares, like, it's in the control sheet. Why wouldn't it be important? And it's like, but I'm not really. So there's like this strange extremist edges of we either don't care at all or we care about every little minutia to the point that we actually don't understand why we care. And like, Alex, I'd love to get your perspective on like how those two opposite ends, almost like overcorrecting for each other, misses the forest from the trees, or am I missing the forest from the trees?
Let me jump in for 1 second because I was so excited to introduce this topic that I forgot to ask you guys to introduce yourselves. And so I think we've said a good. So now the audience knows what we're talking about. This third-party security, giving third parties access to, especially to your cloud accounts, which can be very potentially dangerous. But before we dive more into this, maybe let's just take a step back. Alex, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got here?
Sure. Born and raised in Brazil, still living in the greater São Paulo area right now. Have been an entrepreneur since 1999. Founded consultancy practices, was the first PCI QSA in Brazil, though I'm almost fully recovered. Ran MSSP. In 2014, I founded Needle, which was then something pretty innovative, fully cloud-based SaaS offering for security using supervised machine learning to process logs and do threat detection, which was super new and innovative. We got great customers. The company was sold to Verizon, so I got to lead somehow product management, P&L, go-to-market strategy, and product roadmap for their entire managed services offering as far as detect and response, or their main MSSP offering, like a SIEM, a SOC, people responding to incidents, which was super fun. And currently, I'm co-founder and CTO at Tenchi Security. We're a SaaS offering focusing on disrupting the third-party cyber risk management service. The one key differentiator we have is we're measuring the security posture of your third party's cloud environments, which no one else seems to be doing for a variety of reasons that I won't delve into here. But if you're interested, let me know. I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
Thank you, Alex. And Mark, a Generati legend here in the U.S., but maybe for those of you who don't know you, you could say a couple words.
I don't know if legend, maybe a little infamous. So my name is Mark Borstein, CTO of Tremolo Security. We are an open source identity management company. So authentication, authorization, LDAP virtual directory, all wrapped into one. I have been working in open source my entire career. Started off working in the LDAP virtual directory space. Took a break from vendor work for a couple of years to go be a consultant. And that crosshash of vendor versus industry, pretty much all of them, I've got a little checkbox in, and realized I was spending more time working around pretty demos than actually building business logic. So that's what we built Tremolo around. Spend most of my days in the cloud native space lately. So Kubernetes, CNCF, DevOps and making all of these new systems work the way they're supposed to rather than the way they're promised to.
Did you work at Octet String?
Yeah.
Okay.
You
Now,
didn't realize that?
Now the dots are connecting.
Yeah, no, I was the, so there were 3 versions of the LDAP Virtual Directory, VDE, that came out. The first one was written by the founder, Clayton Donnelly. The
Sure.
second one was written by Phil Hunt, mainly written by Phil Hunt, which was his kind of second
Still at
hire.
Oracle. Yeah.
Yep, Phil's at Oracle. He does standards work, I think, now. And then I got hired out of school, and I rewrote the 3rd version, which is what eventually became OVD, before Oracle rewrote a lot of it. So I started off my career. I posted a project on SourceForge to date myself of how to bridge JDBC, Java's database, and LDAP. And that's where they found me. And they said, hey, we'll pay you to do this. I was still in college. So I was like, all right, could always use some extra money. And then I was graduating. I was like, so y'all hiring? And the rest, as they say, is history.
Awesome. Okay, well, so back to the task at hand. Mark, could you restate your question?
Yeah. So a lot of time when we look at the way that, or at least in my experience dealing with organizations that are looking at third-party access to their systems, it's one of 2 extremes. It's either ignorance is bliss, and we're either just going to hand out an API key, or we're going to hand out credentials, and without really thinking about, well, what does that mean that we're handing it out? Because we don't have proofing, we don't, all the things that you get with an employee. Or they go to this extreme other end where you get this giant control spreadsheet where they want to see every aspect of your design and diagrams, but they don't really know what they're looking at, and it feels like more of a CYA. Like they just want to say that they get it rather than, I'm not supposed to say that.
No, please do. I don't want to be alone saying that, because I've been saying that a ton. Yeah. So thank you.
Where's that middle ground? Where's that happy medium that says we're paying attention, we're doing the stuff that isn't theater, but we're not going so overboard that it's just a stack of papers that no one's ever got. Like, what is that happy medium? What are we supposed to be targeting to be successful here?
So people will invest money and time into the things that are hurting them the most. And I would say the people that are doing the painstaking job are the companies that have more compliance requirements. The large regulated enterprises, the large banks, the large insurance companies, which is actually my ideal customer profile for Tenchi. And when they figure out it's very hard to actually solve a problem, the next best thing is, how do I pretend I at least tried, so that I can either transfer the risk by suing the vendor later when they have an incident.
So plausible deniability.
Or I can show the regulator, hey, I did my due diligence, right? So don't blame me, or at least don't blame me too hard, like small fine, please. So that's what you're saying. You're managing the consequences. You're trying to reduce the impact of a fine, because, hey, I did the industry standard, even if the industry standard is send a questionnaire to the vendor where they'll be possibly lying through their teeth. You pretend to believe them, and if they actually are found to be lying in court or something, you can think about suing them. Like, good luck with that. And that has been the industry standard. Sort of, I'm exaggerating for comical purposes, of course. There are people trying to do the right thing, and there are some small amount of risk mitigation that you can do with the questionnaires if you follow up properly by looking at proper evidence, etc. But as at the end of the day, what we find people doing third-party cyber risk management is realizing this is a very futile exercise. The Gartner itself said, hey, people are spending more money than they ever did. Like the expenditure on TPCRM keeps growing, even though it's nowhere near where it should be, to my opinion. But the number of incidents involving third party just grows. And it's not like a small amount. We were saying before we started recording that if you look at data from the World Economic Forum Cybersecurity Outlook report this year, or the data about cyber insurance claims from Resilience, for example, about 40% of cyber insurance claims are not because the insurance policy holder had an incident on their own infrastructure. It was a third party that had an incident. They were impacted, so they activated they claim. They made a claim to cover the losses incurred because a third party of theirs had an incident. On the World Economic Forum report, 41% of incidents with a material impact started at a third party of the companies they surveyed. So obviously, naturally, 40% of security budgets are focused on reducing the risks third parties represent. Right? Well, not really. So I still feel like people have a blind spot for this, because for the last 14 years they said, hey, there's nothing really that we can do about this. Like the most we can do is shuffle paper around or get the security rating from someone to pretend that we checked if this vendor has a good security
Require our
posture.
vendors get insurance policies so that even if they're small, we still get paid.
Exactly, but yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem, and I don't want to be too salesy here, but we think we found like a third option. We found a new option, a new way of doing this, which requires, God forbid, for security folks cooperating with their third parties and actually investing in their security and helping them improve so that risk reduces. I know it's an amazing concept, but yeah, but it's working, man. We've been working with large banks, and I always come back to the Wendy Mather's concept of the cybersecurity poverty line. Like, if big banks and big insurance companies only worked with vendors or sales channels, let's not forget sales channels, like this insurance company. If you're selling through an insurance broker, they have a data breach and they leak PII, and you're in a country or a state in the US that has privacy legislation, you're on the hook. You're liable for that leak, right? And if you're a large company like this, if you only work with vendors or sales channels that are remotely as mature as you are in cybersecurity, you'll never outsource anything, and you do all your sales yourself. And that's not a viable business option. So the only other option is you work with those people to make them secure. And the real world comparison to this is, think of a company like Toyota. Like, how much do they spend every year improving the quality and the logistics of the manufacturers of the parts of the car they assemble? Because they don't manufacture cars, they assemble cars from hundreds of parts that are each provided maybe from a different vendor. Or Nestle. How much does Nestle invest in the marketing and the logistics of the retailers they work with? Do they want to make donations to the shareholders of those other companies? No, it's just good for business. Like, this cooperation from the more mature company to the smaller, less mature company works in every other industry. We in cybersecurity decided, hey, you must be this tall to ride. I'm going to pretend you are this tall because otherwise no one rides. And that's the other day. So I really think we need to shake ourselves out of this stupor. And access control is not different. We're giving third parties that we have no idea how secure they are, or left and right. We're giving them too much access. We're giving them access the wrong way, and it's coming back to bite us in the behind.
Alex, the situation you're describing is like, okay, we have this small company and their security policies and practices aren't up to snuff with like our big mature enterprise. But it's not always the case that it's a small company that maybe has these lax policies. And in the video that you assigned for the homework, you talked about how Okta,
Yes.
a large publicly traded company who should be very sophisticated from a cybersecurity governance standpoint, had a policy, something to the effect of assume role equals star in their. So they were asking customers to give them access to every single role at Amazon. What's the potential impact? I just wanted to say that this isn't just a little company problem, but what's the potential impact of something like what could a hacker or an attacker do if they got access to an account and then could do something like assume role equals star? Just paint us the worst possible situation.
It's full access, because you're bound to have at least one role with administrator access, even if the identity, the credentials for a user that has that role is stored in a safe somewhere. With multiple people have to be involved. Each has to turn the key at the same time to get access to this. But you will have, right, an administrator access role somewhere, right? Even if you use AWS organizations, There are roles that are created specifically so that the management account can do things on the other accounts on the AWS organization that will have very elevated privileges. So you're going to have the roles that are used by your IAM folks that can create users, can create other roles, that can create IAM policies and grant other people privileges.
But what
So
if you
that's
give them read-only access? Then you're safe, right?
Well, not really, because AWS on the read only. So there's a security audit thing which only gives you read access to metadata, so how things are configured, and there's read only access. Those are both managed IAM policies by AWS. So they're policies that AWS maintains their content, and they're versioned, and they can change outside of their control. So that's already a bit scary. But the read-only access, which people think, oh, this is harmless enough. Well, they can read the contents of every table of DynamoDB that exists on that account. They can read the content of every S3 object on any bucket. They can list all your buckets, right? So there's a lot that you can do to get access to actual business data that's stored on your AWS account if you have read-only access. So it's really, really, really dangerous. And it might have compliance implications if you have PII of your customers stored in that account. Now, every vendor that you gave read-only access to is now in scope for your privacy legislation. If you have cardholder data in that environment, and I'm going back to my PCI days, now that vendor is in scope for your PCI DSS compliance. That's a great way to increase your audit costs and not pass your audits. It's to add stuff to your scope.
Or perhaps access to the secrets management thing tool, which then has access to maybe your PCI data. Mark, I wanted to ask you a question about this. So I'm not an expert in Amazon IAM, obviously, but it's not just Amazon IAM that's complex. There's Google and there's Microsoft and there's even OpenShift and others. What's your experience in how hard is it for cloud engineers to understand all the nuances of these different cloud IAM security policies? And is that really maybe one of the challenges here? We're just asking too much of our cloud engineers.
I mean, to quote C3PO, we're doomed. Yes, right? Like each cloud has their own approach to doing it. You've got all these different roles. The roles change. Like it's not like these roles are static. If you do an analysis of what these roles are over the course of time, they're not always sensical. I mean, Mike, you and I have been in this business for how many decades now? And
3
I know
decades.
I've been at it now for 20 years. I look at some of these IAM roles and I'm like, what? What is this applying to? And it's just language too, right? Like, what you and I think a role is, and might be different than what, like I know me personally, when I first started working with Amazon, their idea of a role made absolutely no sense to me. Because it was like, well, no, this is kind of more of a permission. This isn't really a role. But that's the way Amazon defined it, and they're a 12,000-pound gorilla, so they win. You're trying to normalize that. One of the things that, and bringing up the Okta breach was a great segue to this question as well, is from a technical level, how much are we seeing these breaches aren't just because of the permission reviews, but because somebody's handed out a credential. I forget hacking. Like, I gave it to you, right? Like, you didn't even ask me for it necessarily. I opened up a support ticket and uploaded a trace.
They didn't even know, because it's not even obvious to people that when you submit one of those web browser traces, that there will be a session token stored in there somewhere in a cookie or in whatever it is in browser storage. It's not even people don't understand that that's what's happening, and I feel like that's the basis for the problem with IAM as well. As you said, the learning curve is so great because those things are so intricate and so complicated, because the reality they're trying to represent is so complex that the languages themselves become complex, right? And the permissions they're trying to represent are super nuanced. You have to understand the things they're trying to represent to write those languages. The thing I always say, like, we use serverless here in Tenchi, right? And the thing I realized, and because serverless is the extreme of this, but like infrastructure as code already brings that problem, is that cloud not only is not just like a better data center, it changed the roles that people perform security-wise. So for example, typically you would say, hey, I'm a developer, I'm writing code, and it's being deployed by Jenkins or whatever into a server that already exists. And that server was set up, configured, and is maintained by an operating system team that is specialized in hardening and patching and all those things. Now we are writing infrastructure as code to define a new AMI, machine image in AWS, or we're defining a Docker container, a Docker file that the developer is writing. That's specifying what operating system image am I using, what packages are installed or not installed, how is it configured, what user are the services running as. So now the developer doesn't realize it's like the carpet was pulled from under us. There's no longer an operating system specialist configuring the operating system. Now, what developers doing that? They gained that task like without realizing it. Are they qualified for it? Do they have the tools to do it? Were they trained for it? Do they even know, they realize there are rules they need to follow, there are policies they need to follow around those things, like keep those things up to date? So we're catching up with the changing roles and responsibilities, and the governance in big companies hasn't followed up at it. Most of the companies I've looked at, they're still struggling with this. And I think that's a big part of it. Like, developers don't understand that they need to understand the cloud infrastructure they're working with. They need to understand IAM. If they're building serverless and now they're defining Terraform or CloudFormation that's creating a bucket, it's part of their code, of the feature they're developing. It's not someone else's job to write the bucket policy for that bucket. If they're writing an auto-scaling group that has instances with the roles attached to them, and they're writing an IAM role there on the same CloudFormation file, or the CDK code, or whatever it is, it's their role to make sure that IAM role stands to scrutiny. And if they don't know how to do it, they have to raise their hand and ask a security person to come around and help them. Otherwise, they messed up. They're creating a security problem for the organization. It's on them. But again, do they even realize this? Like, have we trained people enough? Have we made them aware of this? Have we given them the tools to succeed? I don't think we did overall as an industry.
I'm hearing you say that it's the job of the developers to understand the impact of what their software is doing with regard to policy evaluation, which means that it would be better if we externalize policies in some standard way, so that these policies could be reviewed, and so that we could help out developers instead of making them implement their own policy and auditing infrastructure. And, in watching your video about the types of policies that we're struggling, that Amazon, devs are struggling with, I could see where CEDAR came from. And for those of you who don't know, CEDAR is a policy language that looks awfully like the IAM, like ACA language. But in one of your videos, I heard you mention that you were wishing that this CEDAR IAM language was Turing complete. And I don't think CEDAR is, by the way, but CEDAR is deterministic, which means it always gives the same results for the same input, and can reliably execute policy in a consistent way. But I'm wondering, sort of pivoting into this area, if the developers are going to write these policies in a standard way, is that maybe why Amazon has launched verified permissions? And do you see Amazon perhaps migrating their current IAM, what they call their IAM security system, to something like CEDAR in the future? Or let's call it verified permission. So they tell you, okay, instead of using IAM, like these policies in this weird format, you're going to use standard CEDAR policies, which will allow you to do like not resource or more syntactically useful policy expression things.
Yeah, the joke you heard about the IAM language being Turing complete was a play on the fact that it's super complex and has a lot of nuance and different things you can represent, which makes it hard to learn. And yet it's not rich enough to represent a lot of super useful use cases. So in that research, I came up on it with a few examples. And if you watch the video, you're going to understand there's a lot of setup I would have to do to explain the exact detail. But if you're a SaaS provider and you're creating a standard role that you're going to assume in your customers, there's a problem with you assuming the role yourself. Anyway, there's a lot of issues there. Like it would be possible using the language to implement something, but then AWS doesn't support all the keywords in the right places to allow that specific exclusion to happen. And I'm like, why AWS? It's so complex. You support so many complex things. Why not this one? Um, and um, and actually, they try to use the IAM language to represent authorizations on API gateway. So if we're writing a REST API on AWS, there's another piece of research that actually is not linked to on the show notes called The Fault in Our Stars, where even the API gateway team at AWS misunderstood how wildcards work on IAM. So don't feel guilty if you don't understand in detail how IAM policies work. Even service teams at AWS apparently don't either, right? So they made clear documentation mistakes that misled developers because they assumed
There
that the
some
star.
wishful thinking, like here's how we'd like it to work, not here how it actually works, right?
And so the thing is, they would never add regular expressions for a variety of performance and denial of service reasons to the evaluation, but they would have had to. If you want to do proper authorization on REST APIs that accept path parameters, so you're passing non-obvious entities as part of the path that you're accessing in your GET request or your POST request. And so it's impossible to properly authorize an API that has path parameters using that specific way that they offer using the IAM language. And that's another set of things
Right.
that I described
Which
on
is
this other
addressed
list.
in Cedar, by the way. But in order to do this, they had to, and actually it relates in so many ways back to LDAP, Mark, because they need a predictable schema in order to do this. So so they need to make a schema for a URI that includes a path and a host and allows you to actually break it apart in order to make policy about it. But you're right. The way, if you just have the resources, one URL, which is I think how it is in the IAM, or with this star character, that actually makes it even
Yeah.
more complicated. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and
And the other thing I heard about Cedar, by the way, and this is an unconfirmed rumor, but I got it from reasonably reliable sources, is that like if you look at the reInvent presentations on the IAM service, like how many transactions it processes per second or whatever, it's like humongous, and it seems to be collapsing under its own weight. Like AWS is very good at scaling things, but I mean the laws of physics at some point provide limitations to what they can do. And so Cedar, I think, initially started, I heard, as like the IAM replacement. They're building something that is faster, that can scale better, and eventually they're going to phase out the existing JSON base, or they'll find a way to internally, like behind under the hood, convert the JSON based policies when you save them to Cedar, and then evaluate them in Cedar, because that will allow them to scale the IAM infrastructure better.
interesting. Mark, it's like this old problem of like, is this really a third party problem, or is the third party problem maybe indicative of the fact that as an industry, or as let's just look at IT practitioners in general, maybe we just suck at authorization. And this is just this is one like very concrete example of how we need better authorization. And the currently hacky solutions that they've come up with are starting to fail.
So I don't
Any
actually
thoughts?
think we're bad at authorization. That's not the problem. Like I think that's a symptom. Um, I think what we're really bad at is figuring out. So like going back to something you said, Alex, about how this is now the developer's responsibility. If you're relying on your developers to write secure code, you've already lost, right? Like if you're writing code that is helping you build a new widget or whatever, getting a video to your like that, you're worried about that, right? So if we have this tendency to swing back and forth between the extremes of we're going to make our developers do everything, through some combination of thinking, oh, cloud cost, we don't need those OS experts anymore. And, hubris, because, we're developers, we're smart, we know everything. And, uber specialization. And that pendulum goes back and forth a lot. And it's just so the way one of the classic ways I've seen it is I'll talk to an organization that will build out their cloud, and they'll build up and I've got a lot of experience with this in the federal government, U.S. federal government, where they'll say, okay, we're going to build out a product of our cloud. It's going to handle all these controls so that when you come in, it's a PaaS, right? It's a platform as a service. You just got to deploy your code. And, they end up building the system that's so uber difficult to make changes to that whenever somebody has a problem, it becomes the cloud team's fault. Until finally they say, screw it, here's a VPC as a service, have fun. I want nothing to do with this. And we keep swinging back and forth between those pendulums. And so to your point about authorization, the problem I don't think is it's hard to do authorization. We've been doing authorization for 30 years, right? 40 years in code, right? If this, then that, we log it. The issue becomes, how much do we want to externalize that? How much do we want to try to homogenize that? You were mentioning before, Mike, about the different clouds having their own IAM systems. Personally, hopping on my soapbox here, I hate it when people try to homogenize those systems down into a common set of access rules, right? Because those clouds have different IAM systems, not just because they want to lock you in and make sure you get it in so deep that you never get out, but also because they have different opinions on how to implement these things. And if you homogenize that to the point where you lose those opinions on implementation, you're losing all the benefits of those clouds. And I think that's ultimately the root of the problem is we have, as a technical community, have just done a terrible job of trying to find that balance between different responsibilities, managing different silos, who gets the blame, like stuff we don't really like talking about. But we've all been in brainstorming sessions. We've all been called to carpet. We've all had to explain, yes, I crashed that country's IT system. I'm sorry. That's not a technology problem. Those are management problems. Those are organizational problems. I think that's what makes this so hard of a problem to solve, is that I don't care whether you like OPA or, OpenFGA or Cedar or any of these other systems. They're all great, right? They all do a great job. They do things a little bit differently. If you think you're going to homogenize on those things, you're going to lose, right? And so looking at how your organization actually, who owns the different things, where are the silos, what are the intents, that's just a really hard problem to solve. And that's not something we're going to solve with technology, unfortunately. Except for mine if you buy it. No, I'm just kidding.
I wanted to stand up for developers for a second and say, I actually do want to trust developers, but I want to trust but verify, because I think that developers do have to be aware of the impact of what those if-thens do. And we want to get a standard audit log, and we don't want to, and there are some things we need to trust developers to do, but at the same time, we have to make sure that there's a way to review. One of the issues that we brought up, or that Alex brought up as a best practice, is actually reviewing the policies, which is easier said than done, because we have a review software and tools and process and procedure for reviewing the roles of people, but we don't have actually great software tools or policies and procedures for reviewing the access of workloads. And so I'm just wondering, yes, Alex, you gave that as a takeaway for one of your talks, but how does that actually happen? That you can, if we recognize that it is really important to say, does Okta actually need assume role equals star? That should have been flagged in some governance review, right? But
that's not even a developer using that in that
system. There's a process for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the It's hard. There's no easy answer, right? So, but I agree that blaming developers is not the point. Developers are not even aware that they have that responsibility, right? And also, if they're gonna have that responsibility, they need to have the training, the resources, the tools, the support to do it properly. Like you just don't throw people, hey, you're gonna be fixing nuclear reactors now, but I'm not a nuclear person. I don't care. You're gonna do it now. It's not their fault. It's yours as an organization that allocated someone to do a job they're not prepared for. You need to engineer the conditions for people to succeed. So you see people that are integrating Okta, they are not AWS experts, but they're now the Okta admin, and they had to configure AWS access. The next day they have to do SAP access, and then they have to do Salesforce access and whatever it is. They're not experts in all those things. Does the company provide them with experts? Are they allowed in a timely fashion to hire consultancy that is expert on this to support them in doing their job? Or no, are they given an unrealistic timeline? So it's an organizational issue, right? And actually I have an entire talk that I gave about DevSecOps where I tell security folks, you need to have developers on your team. You need to be building tooling. You need to think about developer experience, right? If you want developers to do the right thing, you have to make it easier for them to do the right thing than it is harder. Give them Terraform templates that they can reuse for the typical architectures you use for applications. That saves them time, but is already pre-configured with the right VPC topology and the right IAM roles, right? So it's easier for them to do the right thing than it is to do the hard thing. Have security people reviewing the pull requests, go into their flows, right? And looking for but I'm not even talking about having Git for security policies. What I mean is you need to have security people that are brought into to review the pull requests if IAM roles have been changed on that code, on that Terraform, on that CDK, or whatever it is. Like if you have a smart enough pipeline and code system, you could do this, right? So even if you do it once a month for every repository, I don't care. It's not doing it in real time, but you know what I'm saying? Like you can track those changes. The information is there. You can automate this, right? So you have to give people the tools they need to succeed. And I blame vendors a little bit for this. Because if you are Okta, if you are Splunk, if you are the tool, like Splunk has that problem, by the way. I know a Brazilian researcher that found this exact same problem, the way Splunk connects to AWS. They're requesting way more privileges than they need. And he tried for ages to report to Splunk to update their documentation, that they don't need to ask for those outrageous privileges. They said, not a problem, not fixing it. I don't know if they changed positions since then. I want to be fair to Splunk or Cisco now. But like, that's squarely on the shoulders of the vendor. If you're providing guidance for people on how to set up things, you need to ask an expert. If you're providing integration between your product and AWS, you need to ask an AWS expert if you're doing works and is secure, right? Because you're setting up your customers for failure. And the fact that we don't have liability or consequence for vendors that do that actually like really rubs me the wrong way.
Sure.
Bless you, Mark. So
Yes.
maybe we'll go to last thoughts before we go. This discussion can continue on the website if there are more comments at that time. But Mark, maybe before we go, any last thoughts or more information about Tremolo before we
yeah, I mean, great discussion. Loved it. A little bit of a shameless plug. Kubernetes and Enterprise Guide. That's the second edition. Third edition comes out Amazon September 10th. And we are always having fun in the open source world. So come find us on tremolo.io.
And we'll give you the last thoughts, Alex.
Sure. I really wish people would break out of their stupor and realize that thinking about the security of the interactions you do with your third parties, the data you share with them, the connectivity you have with them, the access you give to them, can be way more than just a paper shuffling exercise. You can design an architecture around them as if they were a component in your software, so you don't have a single point of failure, that you don't overshare, that you minimize the impact. Plus, and that's where I'm going to plug Tengshi, there are ways to have a cooperative interaction with your third parties, supported by software that helps with automation, to help reduce the risk they represent, to help improve their security posture, instead of blindly trusting questionnaires or certificates they're presenting that they fully control. They hire the auditor, they define the scope, they define the controls. Go beyond CYA. Let's do some real security in third-party cyber risk management is what I urge people to do.
Awesome. Okay, well, I learned something on every episode, and so I have to say I really enjoyed doing the research for this one. Thank you guys for joining. Thank you, audience. And next episode, we have Atul, who is on the board of the OIDF now and is doing great work at Signal. And we'll be talking about transaction tokens and CAPE and real-time event signaling in OpenID. So it should be a good conversation. Please join us next Tuesday. So thanks, guys. Thanks, audience. And we'll see you next time.